Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. I can't see you, but I know that some of you are there. So if you are here, put your name and where you're zooming in from in the chat, and we'll get started here in just a minute. Love to see who's here. So add your name, where you're from, and throughout the presentation today, please feel free to use the chat. Welcome, welcome. We're going to get started in about 1 minute. So good to see you, Christine, Brittany, Molly, Sydney, Brittany, Tanya. Vicki Murray is here. Gina Marie from Oxnard, right around the way from me. I'm coming in from Santa Barbara. So good to see so many people. Molly, welcome. Hardeep, great to see you. So many people. All right, it is 7:10. I'm so happy to see math coaches here from Sacramento, senior directors from Modesto, kindergarten teachers from LAUSD, TK teachers from Duarte, math tosas from San Diego. Welcome, everyone. I'm Ellen Barger, and we're going to go ahead and get started on this session. Thank you for coming to Introduction to the California Mathematics Framework. In my day job, I am the Associate Superintendent at the Santa Barbara County Education Office, and I also serve as the chair of the Curricular and Improvement Support Committee of the California County Superintendents. And I have chaired the math subcommittee of that committee for the past 9 years. And I'll just say that in my 37 years in public education, I have been an elementary teacher, a mathematics teacher, a tutor, an administrator, instructional coach, math coordinator, director of curriculum. I'm in CMC, TOTOS, NCTM, NCSM, all kinds of positions that I've held. And I've been part of the math project. And I was also this curious little mathematician at one point who absolutely adored my own preschool teacher, Miss Ruthie, my second preschool teacher, Mrs. Makoski, my kindergarten teacher, Mrs. Anselmo, first grade, Mrs. Perinchak, second grade, Mrs. Johnson. And so I'm coming to you as this little girl who loved her teachers and loved everything you did, they did, you'll do to inspire mathematics. And so as we take a look today, I also come to you with a deep sense of gratitude and responsibility that I get to share with you the California Mathematics Framework. So in this session, I want to do two things. Orient you to the structure, the features, and the organizing concepts of the California Math Framework, and provide for you some entry points for your own use and implementation. So let's get started. But I want to start with this quote. This beautiful quote is about the importance of mathematics for students, and it comes from Francis Su. And it's so important that it's found in Chapter 1, Page 2 of the Math Framework. And it says, a society without mathematical affection is like a city without concerts, parks, or museums. To miss out on mathematics is to live without an opportunity to play with beautiful ideas and see the world in a new light. Mathematical affection. Mathematics, to me, is not merely something to be performed, but is the subconscious and the conscious foundations for thinking, for sense making, and for imagining and creating. And each and every student has the right and the ability to build an internal understanding of mathematics that can grow, adapt, and change throughout their life. And so, as we'll see in this math framework, our new California mathematics framework, It starts with curiosity, play, and experimentation, and develops through engagement, exploration, and essential meaning making through supported construction of language and representation. It's all the things that you do every day, called out specifically, particularly, and integrated into practice. It talks about how we allow our students to revisit concepts at increasing levels of complexity in search of truth, clarity, wonder, and amazement, helping students build that flexible, dynamic web of mathematical concepts, connections, and the skills necessary for their life's pursuits and curiosities. So, as we get started, I am going to start with the orienting to the structure, the features, and the organizing concepts. But first, I just want to share this timeline with you because as we look back over the 4 years that this framework has been in development, our world has changed in ways that none of us could have predicted. And though the process took longer, it allowed for more input, more voices to be heard, and it resulted in a better framework. So we couldn't be at a better time than now with all of us here ready to dive in and dig in to this framework. So I'm going to start with a visual that shows this framework has 14 chapters and 3 appendices and about 1,000 pages, which seems like a lot until we start to chunk it up a little bit. And so if you look at the way that it's structured here, and most frameworks, if you're familiar with them, are structured somewhat in this way. So the first 2 chapters that you see there are not only the introduction, but they lay the foundation, the framework, the ideas, the concepts that really help you navigate through the rest of the chapters. The next 3 chapters, 3, 4, and 5 that you see there in the orange, follow 3 progressions from TK through 12. And the 3 that are chosen are number sense, exploring, discovering, and reasoning with mathematics, and the mathematical foundations of data science, which is probably the area that all educators are the least familiar and least comfortable with. Then the next 3 chapters are the grade band chapters, where you see the progressions and all of the things that are set forth in chapters 1 and 2 played out in TK2, 3.5, 6.8, and 9.12. So you can see that chapter 6 is going to be the chapter that we focus in on today. And then those next chapters that you see there in the blue are all of the in-depth supports, systems, and structures. As I look at the chat, I see we have a lot of TOSAs and leaders and people who provide professional learning for your colleagues. And so there's a lot in those chapters, things like assessment and many of the things that help you overall. And then we have our appendices, and I want to call your attention to Appendix C, especially because all of the vignettes, all of those beautiful examples where you see all the pieces put together in a classroom, those are all brought together in that final appendix. And once we have the final online version, it will be searchable by so many different ways to look at it. So it's a really great way to start. But where we're going to start is with chapters 1 and 2, and we're going to spend a bit of time there today because I also think that that is your entry point. So as you see, chapter 1 is called Mathematics for All, Purpose, Understanding, and Connection. And chapter 2 is Teaching for Equity and Engagement. These 2 graphics that you see in chapter 1 are really the biggest changes and some of the things that educators, leaders, everyone in California who has spent some time in the framework is really excited about because it really helps us to help mathematics become meaningful, relevant, not only to students, but it's also really helpful for teachers. Then, chapter two, as we said, teaching for equity and engagement, really focuses in on the three dimensions of systemic change and the five components of equitable, engaging teaching. So, let's start with chapter one. In chapter one, what you see on the left is the version of the math framework that is on the CDE website. It is the pre-printed version that was there when we were taking it for adoption, when we were doing all the work. And so you'll see along the left side there are line numbers. That was really helpful in giving feedback, but it's still really helpful now when you're starting to orient yourself because you can not only call out a chapter and a page number, but you can also call out a line number. As you look at chapter one, you can see there that it starts with introduction and audience, but some things that I'd like to call out are the why learn mathematics, very powerful. And then the research on how students learn, and then the next section on equity. The two sections that I have rings around bring in the how, the why, and the what of mathematics. I should say it as the why, the how, and the what, as well as the big ideas. So that's where we're going to dig in. So this graphic that you've seen brings together the three components of the way that this entire framework is structured through chapter one and then later on in the chapters. So you'll see in the burgundy color is the why. These are what we call the drivers of investigation. Then you see on the left-hand side in the bluish teal, the how, the standards for mathematical practice. These are not new. These are those 8 standards that run across all the way from TK through 12 for all of our students. And then the what, the content connections. If you're familiar with the NGSS standards, the content connections in many ways are like the cross-cutting concepts. And so we're going to dive into each of these, starting with the why. So the why. There are 3 drivers of investigation, and I'll let you read them silently to yourself while I pause. And I think what's so exciting about this is that we don't always stop and start with our why. Why do we learn mathematics? Why do we ask students to do mathematics? It's so that they can make sense of the world, so they can understand and explain. Why do we ask students to do mathematics? So they can predict what's going to happen. Why do we ask? So that they can impact the future. Understand and explain, predict, affect. These drivers of investigation help to elicit curiosity, motivate students to engage deeply with authentic mathematics, and they really do aim to provide a reason to care about mathematical work. We also have the standards for mathematical practice. That is the how. That's the how. And most of us are really familiar and really fond of the standards for mathematical practice because we know that this is the residue. This is the habit of mind that comes from the compound interest of doing this every day in your classroom. This is what students take when they leave K-12 education, and they take throughout their entire life. And then we have within the for mathematical practice, they are just, well, they're taught carefully and practiced intentionally throughout. I said all that. So then we get to the what. And these are the content connections, the four organizing categories of all TK-12 mathematics. And so if this is the first time you've seen these, that might be a really big idea to say, wait a minute. All the standards, whether I'm talking about counting and cardinality, and number and operations in base 10, whether I'm talking about calculus, whether I'm talking about trigonometry, you're saying that everything fits into these four categories. Take a moment and just think of something that you love teaching or you love learning in mathematics. And think about which of these four content connections it fits into. Reasoning with data, exploring changing quantities, taking wholes apart and putting parts together, discovering shape and space. These are the understandings, skills, and dispositions of all the content that students learn in school mathematics. And so these ideas are really developed and give you so much to think about in chapter 1, but then you see it come back in all of the chapters. One of the other big changes in this framework is the concept of teaching to and planning around the big ideas. Oops. And so the big ideas are a little bit more detail on those four content connections. So the one that you're looking at right now is the big ideas in kindergarten. And each of the dots or the nodes on this connection has a big idea. So you can see bigger or equal, sort and describe data, how many. And among each of these big ideas, there are some connections. This idea of teaching to and planning around big ideas moves us away from this concept of teaching standard by standard. But instead, this is a great conceptual starting place for a PLC, a group of teachers, an entire school or school district to look at what are those enduring and essential understandings that we have in kindergarten. How do they connect to each other and how do they change over time? And so you can really see um, a connection between the content connections, reasoning with data, exploring, taking holes, discovering, and the big ideas. And just for contrast, you can see the kindergarten big ideas next to the sixth grade big ideas. I'll give you a moment to take a look at those. So kind of zooming out for a moment. It's a rapid, quick course in this. But at the top, you see the why, the how, and the what. From the what, the green, you've got the four content connections. Those four content connections are exploded a bit in the big ideas. And then this graph that you see here, or this table that you see here on the right, is just a snapshot from kindergarten. And so the first column has the content connections, those four green areas. The second has these big ideas. And then the third column shows the individual standards that inform or create that big idea. And you can see that those come from counting and cardinality, operations and algebraic thinking, number and operations in base 10, all across the different areas of the standards. And what's I think is so helpful about this is that it allows you to zoom in and zoom out at all of these different levels instead of thinking about the standards as a list of topics or a list because nobody teaches that way. You teach young children. You know that it's whole child, it's holistic, and that this helps us to both make sense but also hone in to know what it looks like when students can do, when students can say, how students are thinking and developing and building their own mathematical webs of knowledge. And so I love this quote that comes actually from chapter 2, but it's that students benefit from viewing mathematics as a vibrant, interconnected, beautiful, relevant, and creative set of ideas. And I think that teachers do too. So, chapter 1 is really about that how, the what, but most importantly, too, the why, and that overview of the big ideas. And that really sets you up for chapter 2. And what's great about chapter 2 is people are like, I want to see what it looks like, though, with teachers and students in classrooms. I want to know what they're teaching. And so, what I would focus your attention on when you go into chapter 2 is the 3 dimensions of systemic change and the 5 components of equitable engaging teaching. These are the 3 components of systemic change. So, an assets based approach to instruction, active engagement through investigation and connection, and cultural and personal relevance. So, I'm just going to give you a moment to pause, and you can put in the chat just as you read those 3 things: an asset based approach to instruction, active engagement through investigation and connection, and cultural and personal relevance. I'll bet that a majority of you have been in a classroom today, and possibly, if not today, then possibly and probably this week. Just take a moment and think about something that you saw in a classroom or that you did because you're the teacher that is one of these 3 things: assets based approach, investigation and connection, or relevance. And you don't have to write what you did, just write which one of those that you saw today or this week in the classroom. While there's this little delay as the chats come up from the time you type it till the time everyone can see it, I see this happening all the time in classrooms with young children. I see the active engagement, the investigation, the curiosity, the making of connections. I'm seeing the relevance when teachers are doing data with students and they're collecting data about themselves and making decisions. So if you've got something, go ahead and put it in the chat and let's just see what we get. Okay, well, I'll let you keep doing that as we move on to the next element that I invite you to look at. And I love this graphic that my colleague, Lauren Aranguren, made, that she was so motivated by these 5 components of equitable and engaging teaching for all students, and working with some of our schools and our teachers and our classrooms made these really cool icons to go with them. So component 1 is around planning the teaching around the big ideas for sense making, for relevance, for connections. Number 2, using open, engaging tasks, low threshold, high ceiling tasks that students have multiple points of entry, those things that they are asking about the next day, that they come in and say, are we going to do that again? That they're still thinking about when when they leave your classroom. Component 3, teaching towards social justice, helping students develop mathematical identity and power. Component 4, inviting student questions and conjectures, and not only inviting them, but modeling them, making them the center of the classroom, and prioritizing reasoning and justification. We're seeing that because just as we saw in the active engagement, in the validating thinking, in the cultural and personal relevance, these assets-based approaches that you all just wrote about, you can probably also connect it to these 5 components that you are seeing as well. And so what's so exciting about chapters 1 and chapter 2, they really build that insight, that starting point for you to work with your colleagues. And then the other chapters really help us to go in deep into each of those areas. So once you look at chapter 1 and chapter 2, you have some choice points. You could go into the orange chapters, into the deep dives into some of those progressions, or you could go into the grade band chapters. So for this presentation today, what I've chosen to do is to just highlight a little bit about chapter 3, number sense, because I know that's where you wanted to go, right? Yes, I can feel it. And we're going to go to chapter 6, the investigating and the mathematics investigating connecting for TK through 5. And one of the things that I want to say is in all of the materials that are available to you, my slides, and I put these 4 chapters, chapter 1, 2, 3, and 6, so that you have those in a Word version and you can jump. So in going into chapter 3, which is the number sense chapter, I have the table of contents. And when I changed over, oh, I just heard that you have materials right now. So you can be following along with my slides. The animations might work for you. They might be in a PDF form, but you also have access to all those chapters right now. So feel free to have those open if you have 2 screens, which is great. Okay, so in chapter 3, I want to call, of course, to the introduction because you always start there. And I really love this, these few pages about the development of students' number sense across the grades, because it's just so beautiful how it talks about the developmental progression and describe. But also there's a really good section in there on fluency, and it's not called out in the table of contents, but that's where you'll find it. And then going a little bit further, if you look at the part that I've circled there, in TK, in the number sense, there's 3 things that you can really read in depth. How that development through the descriptions, the examples, the snapshots, the suggestions, how 3 things. 1, organize and count with numbers. 2, compare and order numbers. And 3, learn to add and subtract using numbers flexibly. This is so great for those of you who are TOSAs working with new teachers, those of you who've been teaching for a long time to get that kind of clarity as well. So in chapter 3, those pages there, 9 through 25, really great reading. As I said, another place to enter besides chapter 3, oh, wait, I forgot. I was going to tell you about this. I also love, this is just one of the many, many features in chapter 3. I just love this, the Preschool Learning Foundation and the California Common Core State Standards for Mathematics for kindergarten. And we also know that the preschool learning foundations are being updated, and those should be coming out soon. But you kind of can get this sense of how these work together. Okay, so now on to chapter 6. So within chapter 6, the mathematics investigating and connecting TK5, I just think this is a fantastic chapter for all of you, because what you see on the left is a snapshot of the big ideas. And let me just give you a moment to take a look at that, because I think it's worthwhile to become oriented with it, to see how the big ideas play out in kinder or in TK, in kindergarten, in first grade, and in second grade. In my county, we have a lot of really small and rural school districts where there will be one teacher in a school per grade level. And so when they collaborate, they don't always have another teacher to collaborate with. And so this is really helpful for people who are singletons. But it's just as helpful in a really large school district or even in a really large school as you're looking at how the progressions of what you're doing in mathematics across those grade levels. I also feel like this is so important right now because as we are still recovering from the pandemic and from opportunities that were lost for learning, as fifth grade teachers who are used to teaching fifth grade, but are getting students who didn't have all of those opportunities to learn what kids years before them had. Teachers are sometimes wondering, well, what were the big ideas? How do I enter understanding what students and how students learned what my prior teachers have come to me with? This is really helpful. So that's what you have on the left. On the right, you have the table of contents for the TK6, I'm sorry, the TK5, Chapter 6, Mathematics Investigating and Connecting. And I think it's really helpful that all the TK2 is there and then the 3 through 5. So, um, also, what I really like about the chapter is that in Chapter 6, in your grade band chapter, you see the integration of everything that was in Chapter 1 and 2, Chapter 3, which was our number sense, Chapter 4, which we didn't look at, but is, the reasoning and investigating chapter, Chapter 5, data science. It's all there specifically for TK2 while illustrating some of the kinds of tasks that we were talking about in Chapter 2, some of the mathematics language routines, and the support for integrated ELD. You'll see seamlessly how especially through the snapshots and vignettes, how the teachers have used universal design for learning, lens, and you can see all of these things layered and integrated. You'll see throughout productive strategies for diverse learners. You'll see how teachers are orchestrating discourse and orchestrating all of this together and how it supports those developmental trajectories. So it's probably going to come as no surprise to you that, that might be a starting point as well. So throughout, I've been hinting at some entry points for implementation and use, but I just want to call out a few right now. And so the first is obviously whether you're talking as an individual, a PLC that is a grade PLC that's multi-grades, a PLC that's a school, or a district-wide PLC. A great question in looking at this graphic is, how does this approach the why, the how, and the what, the drivers of investigation, the standards for mathematical practice, and the content connections, how does this align with our aspirations for our children? And how might this support how we think, talk, and plan about mathematics? Not only is this a great entry point for educators, it's also a great entry point for families and for all of your educational partners. Another great entry point, possibly after you do that, is really to engage with these big ideas, to make connections from the preschool foundations to the K standards. And also, a lot of work is about finding essential standards. This gives us an alternative. If all the standards didn't matter, then they wouldn't have all been written. But the standards are not a roadmap for what to teach. And so the big ideas and engaging in and out from the content connections to the big ideas to the standards, how they connect, it's a really great way to think about how you are structuring either your own classroom over the course of a year or your program over the course of TK-12. Another entry point that I think is helpful for individuals and PLCs is to take a look at Chapter 2 and possibly take something like one of the components. And just an example is prioritizing reasoning and justification. You can read through one of those sections, and then you can discuss it as a team or with some colleagues or in a book club and explore the vignettes that I talked about in Appendix C. And of course, as we just said a few moments ago, another way is to go into that chapter 6. And, I want to see the whole thing put together. I want to get a feel for it. Then I would suggest going into chapter 6 and reading and falling back in love with mathematics and the children who do it. There are so many other points of entry. There are so many places and so much support. And so we have just a few minutes left, but I want to say thank you to all of you. You have uh, the slides, you have the chapters, and we have a few questions. I see there's a question in the chat. It says, will this also be for pre-K or just TK? And so I'm not sure what that referred to because I was so in it. So I'm not quite sure, but the question about will this be for pre-K or just TK, I'm not sure, as I said, what that referred to, but the preschool foundations are going to be updated. When the framework was written, it was written for TK, but there's going to be a lot of work that we're all doing together to really make that bridge because well, just for so many reasons. So great question. I think we have a few more minutes. So as people put in questions in the chat, we'll carry them over and see. Otherwise, you just got, a few minutes back in your time, but I'll just kind of wait and see. All right. I'm not seeing any questions. And so I want to thank you all, 122 of you here today. And oh, wait, I'm just seeing. Okay. I see. Okay, I see the questions now. Previously, there was a chapter dedicated to TK, and now it's part of the grade band. Can you comment on why it is no longer a standalone chapter? I don't remember it being a chapter, so maybe that was in an earlier version, but it is in the grade band. And you can dive into the parts. It's really easy to find the parts that are TK. Let's see, connect to the preschool. Okay, well, I'm not seeing any new questions. And so I'm just kind of hanging out here. Oh, here we go. There's some new ones. Oh, just lots of thank yous. Um, Wonderful. So I hope you dig in And thank you to all 122 of you who came for this session, and I hope to see you all soon.